A stray cat fought a dog for a crust of bread. And what the baker did next will shock you. The alley reeked of stale garbage and damp concrete. It was a smell that had become as familiar to Clementine as the rough brick against her paws, the constant rumble of distant traffic, and the gnawing emptiness in her belly. Clementine was a stray, a ginger tabby whose once vibrant fur was now matted and dusty, streaked with the grime of the city. She wasn't a young cat anymore. The faint white hairs around her muzzle hinted at the years she'd spent navigating the harsh realities of life on the streets of Willow Creek, a small, unassuming town nestled in the heart of Ohio. Willow Creek wasn't a bustling metropolis. It was the kind of place where people knew their neighbors, where front porches were adorned with rocking chairs, and where the pace of life moved a little slower. But even in this seemingly idyllic setting, life for a stray was a constant battle. Clementine had learned that lesson the hard way. She'd known kindness once, a long time ago, in a life that felt like a faded dream. A warm lap, a gentle hand stroking her fur, the comforting scent of lavender and old books. But that life was gone, lost to a memory she could barely grasp anymore. Now, her days were a relentless cycle of searching for food, avoiding danger, and finding a sliver of warmth in the cold, uncaring world. She navigated the back alleys, the overgrown lots behind businesses, and the forgotten corners of Willow Creek with the practiced caution of a seasoned survivor. She knew which dumpsters were likely to yield a discarded sandwich crust, which restaurant owners were prone to shooing her away with a broom, and which houses had dogs that barked ferociously at the mere sight of her. Clementine wasn't entirely alone, though she often felt that way. There was a loose community of strays in Willow Creek, a shifting population of cats who shared the same struggles, the same dangers. They weren't a pack, not like dogs. Cats, especially strays, were solitary creatures, bound together only by their shared need to survive. Clementine occasionally crossed paths with a scarred, one-eyed tomcat she knew as Patches, or a timid calico who always seemed to be hiding in the shadows. They would exchange wary glances, a silent acknowledgement of their shared plight, but rarely did they interact. Trust was a luxury they couldn't afford. The hunger was a constant companion. It gnawed at her insides, a dull ache that sometimes sharpened into a piercing pain. She'd learned to ignore it most of the time, to push it down and focus on the task at hand. Survival. But there were days like today, when the hunger was overwhelming, a desperate clawing that made her weak and lightheaded. She'd found a few scraps of discarded chicken earlier, behind the diner on Elm Street, but it wasn't nearly enough. She pressed herself against the warm brick wall of a building, trying to absorb what little heat remained from the afternoon sun. The late autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of wood smoke and decaying leaves. Winter was coming, and Clementine felt a familiar dread creep into her heart. Winter was the hardest time, when food was scarce, and the cold seeped into your bones, making every movement an agony. She licked her paw, trying to smooth down a particularly stubborn patch of matted fur. Her movements were slow, deliberate, conserving every ounce of energy. She needed to find something, anything, to eat, not just for herself but for a faint mewling sound, barely audible above the city's hum, reached her ears. It came from a cardboard box tucked into a sheltered alcove behind a stack of discarded pallets. Clementine's ears pricked up, her amber eyes softening with a tenderness that was rarely seen. She moved towards the box, her pace quickening, her hunger momentarily forgotten. She peered inside. 3 small, furry bundles huddled together, their eyes still closed, their tiny mouths opening and closing in silent cries. Her kittens. They were barely 2 weeks old, fragile and completely dependent on her. The sight of them, so vulnerable and helpless, filled her with a fierce, protective love, a love that was the only thing that kept her going some days. It was a love that also fueled her desperation. She had to find food. Their lives depended on it. The weight of that responsibility pressed down on her, heavy and unrelenting. She nuzzled them gently, her rough tongue a comforting presence against their soft fur. Then, with a renewed determination, she slipped back out into the alley, ready to face the dangers of Willow Creek once more. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, a beautiful backdrop to a life filled with hardship. The three kittens, barely larger than Clementine's paw, were a riot of ginger fur, miniature versions of their mother. Two were a bright, almost fiery orange, while the third was a paler, creamier shade, like a faded sunset. Clementine had named them, in her own silent way, after the wildflowers that sometimes bloomed in the neglected patches of grass around Willow Creek. Dandelion, Buttercup, and Little Clover, the palest of the three. Their mewling was a constant, high-pitched reminder of their need, a sound that pierced Clementine's heart and drove her to ever greater lengths to find sustenance. In the first few days after their birth, she had managed to find enough scraps to keep her milk flowing, enough to satisfy their tiny bellies. But the past few days had been lean, terrifyingly so. The weather had turned colder, driving people indoors and making it harder to scavenge. The usual sources of food, the overflowing dumpsters, the carelessly discarded leftovers, had yielded almost nothing. Clementine had grown thinner, her ribs becoming more prominent beneath her matted fur. She could feel her strength dwindling, her energy reserves depleted. But the thought of her kittens, their blind trust in her, their utter dependence, kept her going. She would push herself to the brink of exhaustion, searching every nook and cranny, every alleyway, every garbage can, for even the smallest morsel. She remembered a time not so long ago when she had been able to hunt. She had been a skilled hunter, quick and agile, able to catch mice and birds with ease. But those days were gone. An injury, sustained during a fight with a larger tomcat over a scrap of fish, had left her with a slight limp in her hind leg. It wasn't debilitating, but it had slowed her down, making hunting a much more difficult proposition. The hunger was a physical pain now, a constant, gnawing ache that made her head spin. She licked her dry lips, her tongue rough and scratchy. She needed water, too. She hadn't had a decent drink in days, relying on the occasional puddle or the condensation that collected on discarded cans. She crept along the back of a row of shops, her senses on high alert. The smell of frying food wafted from a nearby diner, making her stomach clench with a painful spasm. She knew better than to approach the diner directly. The owner, a burly man with a permanent scowl, had chased her away countless times, yelling and throwing things at her. She spotted a discarded burger wrapper on the ground, a few greasy fries clinging to the inside. She snatched it up, her heart pounding with a flicker of hope. She licked the wrapper clean, savoring the faint taste of salt and grease. It wasn't much, but it was something. Suddenly, a loud barking erupted from a nearby alleyway. Clementine froze, her fur bristling. She recognized the bark, deep, guttural, and menacing. It belonged to Brutus, the stray German shepherd. He was a formidable creature, large and muscular, with a scarred muzzle and a reputation for aggression. He was the apex predator of the Willow Creek strays, the one they all feared. Clementine had encountered Brutus before, and those encounters had always ended badly. She had managed to escape, but not without sustaining a few painful bites and scratches. She knew she couldn't fight him, not in her weakened state, and certainly not with her kittens to protect. She backed away slowly, her eyes fixed on the entrance to the alleyway. She needed to get back to her kittens, to protect them from any potential threat. She slipped into the shadows, her movements silent and fluid, years of experience guiding her every step. As she neared her hiding place, she heard a faint whimper. It was Clover, the smallest and weakest of her kittens. The sound filled her with a surge of adrenaline. She burst into the alcove, her heart pounding in her chest. The kittens were huddled together, their tiny bodies trembling. They were hungry, cold, and scared. Clementine nuzzled them, trying to reassure them, to transfer some of her own dwindling strength to them. She licked them clean, her rough tongue a comforting presence against their soft fur. "It's okay, my little ones," she purred, her voice a low rumble. "Mama's here. Mama will find us something to eat. I promise." But even as she spoke the words, she felt a wave of despair wash over her. She didn't know how much longer she could keep going. She didn't know how much longer she could protect them. The hunger was overwhelming, the fear was suffocating, and the future seemed bleak and uncertain. All she knew was that she had to keep fighting, for their sake. She had to keep searching, keep hoping, keep surviving. Brutus was a shadow, a hulking silhouette against the fading light of the alley. He wasn't just large. He was powerful, the kind of power born from hardship and honed by constant struggle. His German Shepherd lineage was evident in his thick, dark fur. Though it was matted and patchy in places, evidence of a life lived rough. Scars crisscrossed his muzzle, one particularly nasty one pulling his lip into a permanent sneer, revealing a glimpse of yellowed teeth. His eyes, a muddy brown, held no warmth, only a cold, calculating intelligence. He wasn't inherently malicious. Brutus, like Clementine, was simply trying to survive. He'd likely been abandoned, perhaps a family pet who'd grown too large, too boisterous, or too expensive. Or perhaps he'd always been a stray, born into a life of hardship. Whatever his origins, he'd learned to be ruthless. The streets of Willow Creek didn't reward kindness. They rewarded strength and cunning. Brutus had established himself as the dominant stray in the area. He controlled the best scavenging spots, the dumpsters behind the restaurants, the overflowing trash cans outside the grocery store. He tolerated no competition. Other strays, even the larger tomcats, gave him a wide berth. They knew that challenging him meant a fight they were likely to lose. He'd encountered Clementine several times before. He remembered her scent, the faint whiff of ginger and desperation. He hadn't actively sought her out, but their paths had crossed, usually over scraps of food. He'd always driven her off, easily overpowering her. He hadn't killed her. There was no sport in killing something so small and weak. But he'd made it clear that she was beneath him, that she existed only at his sufferance. Today, he was particularly hungry. The pickings had been slim. A few discarded bones, a half-eaten sandwich, nothing substantial. His stomach growled, a low rumble that echoed in the narrow alleyway. He was patrolling his territory, his senses on high alert, searching for any sign of food. He caught a scent, a faint but familiar aroma. It was Clementine and something else, something new, the scent of kittens. He paused, his head cocked, his ears pricked up. Kittens meant vulnerability. Kittens meant a mother cat distracted, weakened, and desperate. Kittens meant an easy meal. He didn't feel any particular malice towards the kittens or towards Clementine. It was simply a matter of survival. He was bigger, stronger, and he needed to eat. They were a potential source of food, and in the brutal calculus of the streets, that was all that mattered. He started to move, his powerful legs carrying him silently down the alleyway. He followed the scent, his nose to the ground, his eyes scanning the shadows. He knew the area well, every nook and cranny, every hiding place. He was patient, methodical, a predator stalking its prey. He rounded a corner, his eyes adjusting to the deeper gloom. He saw the cardboard box, tucked away behind the pallets. He saw the faint movement, the subtle rustling of fur. He saw Clementine, her back arched, her fur bristling, her eyes blazing with a fierce, protective fire. He stopped a few feet away, his massive frame blocking the narrow passage. He didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stood there, a silent, imposing presence, radiating an aura of menace. He knew he had the advantage. He knew she was trapped. Clementine hissed, a low, guttural sound that was more a snarl than a meow. She crouched low to the ground, her body shielding the entrance to the box. She knew she couldn't win a fight, but she would defend her kittens to the death. She would scratch, bite, claw, anything to buy them time, to give them a chance, however slim, to survive. The standoff stretched out, seconds feeling like an eternity. The only sound was the faint mewling of the kittens, a desperate counterpoint to the silent tension between the two adult animals. The air was thick with the scent of fear, of desperation, of the primal instinct to survive. The fate of 3 tiny lives, and the shattered hope of their mother hung precariously in the balance. The German Shepherd, driven by his own hunger, was the immediate threat, but the larger, uncaring world of Willow Creek, with its cold nights and empty bellies, was the true enemy. Just a block away from the tense standoff in the alley, the warm, yeasty aroma of baking bread spilled out onto the quiet street. The Daily Bread, a small, unassuming bakery, was a fixture of Willow Creek. Its windows, frosted with condensation, glowed with a soft, inviting light, a beacon of warmth in the gathering dusk. Inside, the air was thick with the comforting scent of cinnamon, sugar, and freshly baked bread. The baker, Samuel Miller, was a man of routine. He'd been running the Daily Bread for over 30 years, taking over the business from his father, who had taken it over from his father. It was a legacy, a tradition, and Samuel took immense pride in his craft. He was a large man, with a round belly that strained against his flour-dusted apron, and hands that were surprisingly gentle for their size. His face, weathered and lined, was usually creased with a smile, a testament to his generally cheerful disposition. But tonight, Samuel was preoccupied. Business had been slow lately. The new supermarket on the outskirts of town was drawing customers away, offering cheaper, mass-produced bread. He'd been struggling to make ends meet, worrying about the future of the Daily Bread, the future of his family's legacy. He'd been experimenting with new recipes, trying to attract customers, but nothing seemed to be working. He was kneading a large batch of dough, his strong hands working rhythmically, pushing and folding the soft, pliable mass. The repetitive motion was soothing, a form of meditation that helped him clear his head. He loved the feel of the dough, the way it yielded to his touch, the way it transformed from a simple mixture of flour, water, and yeast into something magical, something that nourished and comforted. He glanced out the window, his gaze sweeping across the quiet street. He saw the usual sights. Mrs. Henderson's cat perched on the windowsill across the way, the flickering streetlight, the empty benches in the small park. He didn't notice the alleyway, shrouded in shadow, where a life-or-death struggle was unfolding. He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. He was tired both physically and mentally. He was starting to doubt himself, to wonder if he was good enough, if he could keep the bakery afloat. He missed his wife, Sarah, who had passed away 5 years ago. She had been his rock, his confidant, his biggest supporter. He often felt lost without her. He finished kneading the dough, shaping it into loaves and placing them on baking trays. He slid the trays into the large, brick oven, the heart of the bakery. The heat radiated outwards, warming his face. He closed the oven door, setting the timer. He started to clean up, wiping down the counters, sweeping the flour-dusted floor. He was a meticulous man, taking pride in keeping his bakery spotless. He believed that cleanliness was next to godliness, a sentiment that had been instilled in him by his father. As he was sweeping, he heard a faint noise, a high-pitched squeaking sound. He paused, listening intently. He heard it again. It seemed to be coming from outside, from the back of the bakery. He frowned. He didn't like stray animals hanging around. They could carry diseases, contaminate the food. He'd had to chase away a few cats before. He grabbed a broom, intending to shoo away whatever creature was making the noise. He opened the back door, stepping out into the cool night air. The alleyway was dark and shadowy, the only light coming from the bakery's back window. He couldn't see anything at first. Then he heard the noise again, closer this time. It sounded like kittens. He took a few tentative steps forward, his eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness. And he began, very faintly, to see the drama unfolding, just out of clear sight, just out of reach, but close enough to touch his weary, worried heart. The smell of fresh bread, however, was still a small haven, a tiny beacon of potential salvation, hanging unknowingly in the air, a subtle promise of something better. It was a stark, almost cruel contrast to the desperation playing out just yards away. Clementine had backed herself as far into the alcove as she could, her body a trembling shield in front of her kittens. Brutus stood at the entrance, a hulking silhouette, his presence filling the narrow space. The faint mewling of the kittens was a constant, heartbreaking reminder of what was at stake. A stroke of luck, a cruel twist of fate, a single crust of bread, discarded earlier by a hurried passerby, lay on the ground between them. It was old, stale, and probably riddled with dirt, but to the starving animals it was a feast. It was this scrap that had drawn Clementine out, the scent overriding her caution. It was this scrap that had sealed her fate. Brutus took a step forward, his low growl rumbling in his chest. Clementine hissed, her back arching, her claws extending. She knew she couldn't win, but she wouldn't surrender. She would fight for every second, every inch, every desperate breath. He lunged, not at her, but at the bread. Clementine reacted instantly, darting forward, trying to intercept him. She was too slow. He snatched the bread in his massive jaws, his teeth crunching through the stale crust. Clementine attacked, driven by a primal fury. She leaped onto his back, her claws sinking into his thick fur. He shook her off easily, flinging her against the brick wall. She landed hard, a sharp pain shooting through her injured leg. She struggled to her feet, her body trembling with pain and exhaustion. Brutus was tearing at the bread, swallowing it in large gulps. He'd finished it in seconds. He looked up, his eyes meeting Clementine's. He wasn't satisfied. He was still hungry, and he knew where to find more. He moved towards the alcove, his intention clear. Clementine stood her ground, her body shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She was injured, weakened, and outnumbered, but she wouldn't give up. She wouldn't let him get to her kittens. He lunged again, this time aiming for her. She dodged, barely avoiding his snapping jaws. She raked her claws across his face, drawing blood. He roared in pain and anger, a deafening sound that echoed in the narrow alleyway. He swiped at her with his massive paw, catching her on the side of her head. She was thrown against the pallets, her head hitting the wood with a sickening thud. She lay there, stunned, her vision blurring. Brutus advanced, his shadow falling over her. He lowered his head, his hot breath on her face. She could smell the scent of blood, her own and his. She could hear the frantic mewling of her kittens, their cries growing fainter as her consciousness faded. She closed her eyes, bracing for the final blow. She'd failed. She'd tried her best, but it wasn't enough. She'd failed to protect her kittens. The thought was more painful than any physical injury. But the blow never came. Instead, she heard a different sound, a new sound, a human voice shouting, "Hey, get away from her. Get out of here." The voice was loud, angry, and filled with authority. Brutus hesitated, his head snapping up, his ears pricking. He looked towards the source of the sound, his eyes narrowing. Clementine struggled to open her eyes, her vision still blurry. She saw a figure standing at the entrance to the alleyway, a large figure silhouetted against the light from the bakery. It was Samuel, the baker, holding a broom in his hands. Brutus growled, unsure of what to do. He was used to intimidating other strays, but humans were a different matter. Some were kind, offering food and shelter. Others were cruel, chasing him away with sticks and stones. He couldn't tell which category this human fell into. Samuel took a step forward, brandishing the broom. "I said get out of here. Go on, get." Brutus hesitated for a moment longer. Then, with a final growl, he turned and fled, disappearing into the darkness. He was hungry, frustrated, and injured, but he wasn't stupid. He knew when he was outmatched. Samuel stood there for a moment, his heart pounding, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He'd seen the whole thing, the brutal fight, the desperate courage of the mother cat, the terrifying vulnerability of the kittens. He'd been frozen at first, shocked and horrified, but then something had snapped inside him. He couldn't stand by and watch, he couldn't let that happen. He lowered the broom, his hands trembling. He looked at Clementine, lying motionless on the ground. He was afraid she was dead. Samuel cautiously approached Clementine, his heart heavy with dread. He knelt beside her, his large frame casting a shadow over her battered body. He reached out a tentative hand, his fingers brushing against her matted fur. She flinched, a slight tremor running through her body. She was alive but barely. Her eyes were half closed, her breathing shallow and ragged. He could see the blood on her fur, the scratches on her face, the swelling around her injured leg. He felt a surge of compassion, a deep, visceral ache in his chest. He'd never been particularly fond of cats, but seeing this creature, so small and vulnerable, so fiercely protective of her kittens, had stirred something within him. He couldn't just leave her there to die. He heard the faint mewling coming from the cardboard box. He looked inside, his eyes widening in surprise. 3 tiny kittens, huddled together, their eyes still closed, their tiny mouths opening and closing in silent cries. They were so small, so helpless, so utterly dependent. The sight of them broke through the last of Samuel's reservations. He knew he had to do something, anything, to help. He couldn't leave them there to starve, to freeze, to become prey for another predator. He carefully scooped Clementine up in his arms, cradling her gently against his chest. She was surprisingly light, her body emaciated from hunger. She didn't resist, her strength completely depleted. He carried her towards the bakery, his mind racing. He didn't know anything about caring for cats, let alone injured ones and newborn kittens. He thought of calling the local animal shelter, but it was late, they were probably closed. And he wasn't sure he trusted them. He'd heard stories about overcrowded shelters, about animals being euthanized. He decided to take them inside, to give them shelter for the night, to figure out what to do in the morning. He opened the back door of the bakery, stepping into the warm, brightly lit space. The scent of baking bread, usually so comforting, now felt strangely out of place, a stark contrast to the grim reality he was holding in his arms. He gently placed Clementine on a clean towel on the floor, near the warmth of the oven. He then went back for the box of kittens, placing it beside her. He filled a small bowl with water, placing it within her reach. He didn't have any cat food, but he found a saucer of milk, hoping it would be enough for now. He stood there for a moment, looking down at them, his heart aching with a mixture of sadness and determination. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew he couldn't abandon them. He had to try to help them, to give them a chance at survival. He thought of Sarah, his late wife. She had loved animals, always taking in strays, nursing them back to health. She would have known what to do. He wished she were here now to guide him, to comfort him. He felt a tear roll down his cheek, a single drop of grief for his lost love, for the injured cat, for the vulnerable kittens, for the harsh realities of the world. But beneath the grief, there was a flicker of something else, something new, a sense of purpose, a feeling of connection, a spark of compassion that had been dormant for too long. He had been so focused on his own problems, his own worries, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to care for another living being. He knelt down beside Clementine, stroking her gently. "It's okay, little one," he murmured. "You're safe now. I'll take care of you. I promise." He didn't know if she understood him, but he hoped she could sense his sincerity, his genuine desire to help. He stayed there with her, watching over her and her kittens, until the first rays of dawn crept through the bakery windows, bringing with them a glimmer of hope, a promise of a new day, a new beginning. The smell of bread, now fully baked, filled the air, a silent testament to resilience, to the enduring power of life, even in the face of adversity. The first few days were touch and go. Clementine remained weak and listless, barely eating or drinking. Samuel worried constantly, checking on her and the kittens every few hours. He'd called a local veterinarian, a kind woman named Dr. Emily Carter, who had come to the bakery to examine Clementine. Dr. Carter had cleaned and bandaged Clementine's wounds, confirming that her leg wasn't broken, just badly bruised. She'd given Clementine some antibiotics and pain medication, and had shown Samuel how to administer them. She'd also provided some special kitten formula, explaining that Clementine's milk production was likely low due to her poor condition. Samuel followed Dr. Carter's instructions meticulously, feeding the kittens with a tiny syringe, cleaning Clementine's wounds, and coaxing her to eat small amounts of soft food. He'd even moved a comfortable armchair into the back room of the bakery, sleeping there at night so he could be close to them. He talked to them constantly, his voice low and soothing, telling them stories about Sarah, about the bakery, about his hopes and dreams. He found a strange comfort in their presence, in their vulnerability, in their quiet dependence on him. Slowly, gradually, Clementine began to improve. Her appetite returned, her eyes regained their brightness, and she started to move around more, albeit with a slight limp. She was still wary of Samuel, flinching at his touch, but she allowed him to care for her and her kittens. She seemed to understand on some instinctual level that he was trying to help. The kittens thrived under Samuel's care. They grew rapidly, their eyes opening, their tiny bodies becoming more coordinated. They were playful and curious, tumbling over each other, exploring their small world with wide-eyed wonder. Dandelion, Buttercup, and Clover, as Samuel had officially named them, brought a spark of joy into the bakery, a lightness that had been missing for years. One morning, Samuel was kneading dough at the counter, the kittens playing at his feet, when he felt a soft touch against his leg. He looked down and saw Clementine, rubbing against his ankle, purring softly. It was the first time she had initiated contact, the first sign of trust. He knelt down, his heart swelling with emotion. He gently stroked her head, her fur feeling softer now, cleaner. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, her purr growing louder. He felt a tear roll down his cheek, a tear of gratitude, of relief, of a newfound connection. From that day on, Clementine became a part of the bakery family. She would follow Samuel around, watching him work, sleeping in the armchair, greeting customers with a soft meow. The kittens, as they grew older, became a source of amusement and delight for everyone who visited the Daily Bread. They would chase balls of yarn, bat at flour dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and curl up in baskets of warm bread, their presence filling the bakery with a sense of warmth and joy. Business, surprisingly, began to pick up. People were drawn to the story of the rescued cat and her kittens, a story that had spread through Willow Creek like wildfire. They came to buy bread, of course, but also to see Clementine and her playful offspring, to offer a kind word to Samuel, to be a part of the heartwarming narrative that had unfolded within the walls of the Daily Bread. Samuel found himself smiling more, laughing more, feeling a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He was no longer just a baker. He was a rescuer, a caregiver, a friend. He had found a connection, not just with Clementine and her kittens, but with his community, with the people of Willow Creek, who had rallied around him, offering support and encouragement. He realized that Sarah had been right all along. Kindness mattered. Compassion mattered. Even the smallest act of generosity could make a difference, could change a life, could heal a broken heart. He had been so focused on his own grief, his own struggles, that he'd forgotten the simple joy of helping others. Clementine never fully lost her limp, a permanent reminder of her past struggles. But she had found a safe haven, a place where she could finally relax, where she could raise her kittens without fear, where she could be loved and cared for. She had found a home. And Samuel, the lonely baker, had found a family. He had found a renewed sense of purpose, a connection to his community, and a love that transcended the boundaries of species. He had learned that even in the darkest of alleys, even in the face of overwhelming adversity, hope could bloom, as unexpected and as beautiful as a wildflower pushing its way through the cracks in the concrete. The Daily Bread was no longer just a bakery. It was a sanctuary, a testament to the enduring power of compassion, a place where broken hearts, both human and feline, could find healing and a fresh, warm start. The aroma of bread, mingled with the soft purrs of a contented cat and the playful meows of kittens, was the sweetest scent of all, a constant reminder that even the smallest of creatures deserved a second chance. And sometimes, all it takes is one act of kindness, one moment of bravery, to change everything. The fight for a single crust of bread had ended, but the story of a baker, a stray cat, and 3 ginger kittens had just begun. It was a story Willow Creek would tell for years to come.